First, the glaciers melt, then the heavens part. As Pakistan bails out from unprecedented monsoon flooding, now comes the stark realization this is not some freak of nature. It's the new normal for a nation that scientists rank among the most vulnerable to global warming. We'll ask about the latest, the challenges faced by rescuers, and what's expected of the international community, not just the UN, which has launched a fund drive, and the IMF, which has agreed to debt relief, but whether Islamabad should put aside its rivalry with India on this one. Droughts and floods are a peril so great, some suggest a rethink of the way Pakistan is run. Critics point to the promises of 2010 when deadly flooding of the Indus River prompted a plan to overhaul disaster management. How has that plan worked out? How to make better governance in the face of this new reality? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Pakistan's new normal. With us from the capital, Islamabad, Jennifer Ankrom Khan, country director for the French charity Action Against Hunger. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for welcoming me.
From Quetta in the north, Rafiullah Kakar, development policy analyst for the Baluchistan regional government. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
And from London, Ayesha Siddiqa, author and independent scholar, senior fellow at King's College London. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate, where you can always join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, nearly 1,200 killed, many still missing. France 24's Shahzad Bouallah went to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province and filed this report.
A military helicopter returns from a rescue operation in the Klam Valley, as all roads leading to the area have been washed away by raging floods. Among the ones rescued are some stranded tourists, but also injured locals. This man carries his wounded son on his back. This pregnant woman has been sick for days. She's directly taken to a hospital.
We saw the buildings near the river collapse. A hotel collapsed in seconds before our eyes. The flow of water was so strong that you can't even imagine it. It washed away roads. But since we were on higher ground, we survived. We were so scared, people left all their belongings, their cars, and ran just for their lives.
This city was completely submerged underwater until 2 days ago. But now the water is slowly receding. Vilayat Shah, a construction worker, has returned to his home to witness the damage that has been done.
The floods have destroyed everything. The water has come up here. This whole wall has been cracked. See with your own eyes. Come, I'll show you how it is inside. Look, here the floor has collapsed. It will take us at least 6 months to rebuild our house. The government has only promised 25,000 rupees. It is not enough. It's like giving a grain of rice to a starving person.
Those who are still unable to return to their homes are forced to live in makeshift camps like this one. Some local NGOs try to distribute relief goods, but they often end in chaos. The young and strong are able to make their way, while the women and the elderly struggle.
You see, there are so many people. There are a lot of homeless people. As soon as a van arrives with humanitarian aid, people gather around it. There's a shortage of food, shelter, medicine for children, and milk for newborns. The situation is the same on all sides.
I'm very hungry. I haven't eaten anything since this morning. I thought I could at least get a packet of cookies, but there are only men here and they push us away. I have 6 daughters and a young son. We are forced to live in these humiliating conditions.
Most of the people here belong to the poorest segment of the society. They have lost all their belongings. Their homes have either been destroyed or badly damaged. They don't know if they will be able to go back to their lives as they were before.
Jennifer Ankrom Khan, when Shahzad Bouallah filed that report, it was a couple of days ago, just after those flood waters had receded in the northwest. At food distributions, are we still witnessing the same scenes of chaos?
I think what's important to note is that it's a different situation in each part of the country. We've been seeing the flood situations and the heavy rains in some of the northern areas, particularly Baluchistan. This has been going on for about 1 month now. What we're seeing is that the flood waters have receded a lot from the north, but they are traveling down the country. And as you can probably see on your pictures now, they've reached to Sindh, which is the final province before the sea. And there's a large expanse of that province is underwater still.
A large expanse underwater. Are people bracing for it? Are they able to get to higher ground?
I think communities have been trying very hard to organize themselves. And this is what we as a community, as well as the government, has been trying to organize them in advance of a monsoon. We know every year that a monsoon is going to come. And therefore, they have had evacuation plans in place. They've had items in place to help them once they're displaced. But the problem is just the scale that this has happened this year. We are talking about monsoon, which is always very heavy water, but this is 5 times the amount of a normal monsoon, which I'm sure you can understand it is just a deluge. And that's why people are trying to move. I met someone in Sindh 2 weeks ago who'd already been displaced, but the place that they were displaced to, they've had to again be displaced in the last few days because those places have also come underwater.
Rafiula Kakar, what's it like where you are in Quetta?
Thank you. Well, as Jennifer said, within Balochistan, there is great regional and geographical diversity. So in the northern parts of Balochistan, where we receive torrential and flash floods, these are the relatively hilly areas, so the water is receding and the government is engaged, the communities are engaged in relief and operation works. Despite challenges of physical connectivity and digital connectivity. However, in the southern part of Balochistan and in the southern east part, which we call the plain areas, which are connected to the Indus River system via the canal system, there we still see water, lots of communities where the water, we have a similar situation as in Sindh, and many communities are still unable to find dry and higher places where they can take some rest and where the government can provide some support. So in the north, the situation is getting better, but in the southeast and in the south, it's still a very bleak situation.
In 2010, after the Indus River burst its bank, 2,000 people died at the time. The government created the Pakistan Disaster Management Authority. How has that authority fared in this crisis?
Well, as you would probably know, Pakistan has a multi-tiered governance structure. So we have a National Disaster Management Authority that operates at the national level. Then we have provincial disaster management authorities who have the mandate to operate at the provincial levels. And then we have the district disaster management authorities. Frankly speaking, their performance to deal with this crisis has not been up to the mark. And the primary reason is that as a government, as a country, we are still dealing climate change and disasters as if it is something that can be tackled in isolation. I think we need to come up with a strategy that mainstreams climate change adaptation and mitigation and preparedness across the policy cycle, across various sectors. We cannot fight and prepare for climate change in silos. So this approach of creating one disaster management authority that operates in silos has clearly not worked. And moving forward, I think the government of Pakistan and the provincial governments need to realize that they need to mainstream, they need to promote sensitization, and they need to change the development approach, which sort of is based on disregard for water pathways, for water channels, and environmental friendliness.
Yeah, because you heard Jennifer mention how every year you know the monsoon is coming. In this particular case, with 5 times more water coming, what is needed to help people get to higher ground in time?
Well, I think, first of all, as a country, we need to change our approach to development, which currently is a top-down development approach, and which is not very friendly towards environmental change, towards climate sensitivity. So we need to come up with a more environment-friendly, climate-sensitive development approach, and we need to revisit our approach to these large infrastructure projects. Urban sprawls are developing, infrastructure projects are erected on the banks of rivers, water pathways are blocked. So first, we need to bring a paradigm shift in the way development is carried out, in the way infrastructure is designed and built in this country. With this paradigm shift in our development approach, I think then we need to move to an early warning and forecasting system. I think we have a very underdeveloped early warning and forecasting system, and of course, early warning forecasting system preparedness, and then we need to come up with a response strategy. Right now, the response is not coordinated. Various government wings are operating in silos. So we need to have a very proactive and well-coordinated strategy where different arms and wings of the government are working in coordination rather than in silos.
Ayesha Siddiqui, this is where we get into politics, because is that possible? Getting those different agencies that, as you just heard Rafiullah say, work in silos to come together. Whose job is it to bring them together? How do you do that?
Well, Rafiullah is on the dot. I mean, he's right that there are several problems. There is problem with our development strategy. There is problem with governance systems. I mean, for example, a lot of loss happened. I mean, millions of houses have been lost. But one of the reasons for that is that nobody checked as buildings were being constructed or very close to riverbanks, in fact, on riverbanks. Now, for that, you need, firstly, a governance strategy, but you also need a very stable government. This is not something which a political government or the military, the politically powerful military can do on its own. There has to be coordination. And I think that if it's going to be indefinitely, this is going to be an ongoing or a repeated saga. It's not just that, there have been excessive 190% more rain than normal, what Pakistan normally gets. But there is going to be, more melting of glaciers. Pakistan sits at a point where it gets where it's very affected by climate change. Now, to handle that, firstly, I think we need to look very, very carefully at how do we divide our budget. The excessive money which is going towards non-development, basically debt servicing and defense, I think that needs to go. That needs to be diverted. But more important, I think the different agencies need to work together. I mean, right now, it's a crisis that NDMA, which is National Disaster Management Authority, despite being a full-blown structure, had no capacity to record data of rainfall and where exactly rains were happening. So with that kind of poor governance, you can't survive.
Right, and you mentioned there the fact that it's not just floodwaters, what with weather systems that are warmer and stall more easily over a country. There's also, as you just mentioned, Ayesha, the Himalayas. Pakistan, home to over 7,200 glaciers, more than anywhere outside the poles. This is an article from the news website Vox. It talks about warmer temperatures, which means rain falling on ice, which further accelerates, a vicious circle, further accelerates the melting. The results can be devastating, like these images from the month of May, when the Hassanabad Bridge in the north collapsed because of those melting glaciers. Do you get the sense, Ayesha, that, and we're getting the sense here in Europe, by the way, that everything seems to now be going, as was prophesized, into fast forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's like 2010. There was loss of life, and then 2011 there was another floods. But then there was kind of silence in the middle, and now this is more devastating than what we saw in 2010, 2011. But right now the government's emphasis is, and in some ways understandable, on how to collect more resources, appeal to international governments. But where is I would really like to see a strategy, besides collecting resources and getting international attention. There's a loss of infrastructure, and I think Pakistan needs to build its capacity while getting money from the international community. Also needs to build its capacity to earn money, to bring resources on a more regular basis. And I think that's where trade becomes so important. Especially regional trade becomes very important. So instead of just looking at, all right, here is the moment, let it pass, and then we'll strategize. I think this is a moment when important new decisions can be taken.
Jennifer Akram Khan, we're going to have weeks, we saw in that report at the outset, even months, where the poorest sections of the population are going to need assistance. Next week, the UN boss, Antonio Guterres, is going to be in Pakistan to witness the damage. For a charity like yours, how do you fit in? How do you make sure that that the coordination between the private sector, the public sector, international organizations works, and that you're where you should be?
Sure. I think what's very important to note is that obviously this crisis is coming on top of many other crises in the country. And when we talk as our organization, Action Against Hunger, obviously our focus is a lot about people having food to eat and being nourished. And what we're seeing is that a third of the country is food insecure. This was even in 2018, as per the latest National Nutrition Survey. In February 2020, 100% of the food market was in crisis. And since then, we've obviously had the impact of COVID. We've had the impact of the Ukraine crisis on the food prices globally. And then you've had successive natural disasters. And, my colleagues mentioned some of those: drought, flood, heat wave, cold wave. These things are happening in districts which have never faced these kind of situations before. Now, the kind of action that we're doing, obviously, this is immediately after a disaster. What we're doing is we're trying to support those people with the urgent needs that they have. And that means, the relief goods that they need. Maybe they need food. Maybe they need a shelter to sleep under. Maybe they need water. What we do as an organization is we go in and we assess. We try to work out what is the most suitable need of that community, and we try to give it as quickly as possible. But we mustn't forget that whatever we're giving right now is purely to keep people alive, and rebuilding will start very, very soon. And what we need to make sure is that there is support both within the Pakistan government as well as overseas governments to support that rebuilding. Because at the moment, I don't think that the government will be necessarily in a financial state to try and support all of these people. Because we're talking a country of 220 million where, we've got 33 million people have been affected by these floods.
Earlier this week, the International Monetary Fund releasing $1.1 billion. There's now a fund drive being launched by the United Nations. Your thoughts on money drives?
Obviously, long term, we would hope that people won't require external assistance. We would hope that the government and the people of Pakistan will be able to be resilient enough when disasters arrive. But I don't think that this year we're going to see that. And therefore, I think that these appeals are a good thing, and hopefully they'll help the country. I would highlight that while the appeal is there, it is not yet funded. There are some pledges coming in, but even the appeal is much lower than we saw in 2010. And while we're seeing the number of deaths are less than 2010, actually the number of people affected are more. And potentially the deaths are less because we have the National Disaster Management Authority and because we have the Provincial Disaster Management Authorities that have been trying to work, as is our community, to make people aware of what to do. For example, we work in communities and we help them to understand when does the flood water in their particular community get so high that they should leave. They have poles in their community that help them to trigger that evacuation that's needed.
Rafiullah Kakar, you agree?
I agree by and large with the caveat that the most underdeveloped and lagging areas of Pakistan suffer more in this crisis because, for example, in the province of Balochistan, most international NGOs are not allowed to operate. And many national NGOs have to get security clearances and other issues as a result. The region is already inaccessible, and whatever international aid is coming, that is also unlikely to make it to some of the remotest areas in the province. Here, I would also like to add that in addition to the fact that the government of Pakistan and Pakistan as a country needs to bring about a fundamental change in their approach, I think it is also high time we realize that fighting climate change is not theoretically, it is almost impossible for developing countries like Pakistan to fight this alone. Countries like Pakistan contribute less than 1% of global greenhouse emissions, and yet they are among the top 10 vulnerable countries in the world. And the worst part is that each year Pakistan is climbing up the ladder of climate vulnerable countries. I think it is also time that as an international community, the leading players come together and take climate change seriously. We don't need the reactive approach where donors and international communities coming to countries only after the disaster has happened. I think international community also needs to act in terms of mitigation and preparedness and do their bit to reduce the vulnerability of countries to climate change.
Now, earlier we heard Ayesha Siddiqa mention how one of the problems domestically for the Pakistanis is the fact that there often is political instability and it's hard to plan for the future in that instance. Right now, could this current disaster, though, change that perhaps? After being forced out, the former Prime Minister Imran Khan back in court this Thursday, he got a reprieve, an injunction effectively shielding him from arrest over accusations he threatened police and a female judge during a speech at a rally last month. This after his successor, Shehbaz Sharif, extended an olive branch to Khan with a joint plan to deal with this current flood crisis.
Let us sit down and strike a national integrity to deal with this situation today and tomorrow, and to see Pakistan comes out of this problem with our united effort. Let's move with unity of thought and action. Let's move in unison. That is the way forward.
Rafiullah Kakar, your reaction to the Prime Minister's offer?
I think the olive branch offered by the Prime Minister is worth appreciation and commendable, but I am skeptical if it is going to work. I don't think the opposition leader Imran Khan is going to take it because he is riding a wave of popularity and he thinks he's going to sweep the next general elections. So I don't think this crisis is going to make a major impact on the political crisis and instability that we are facing as a country. I think at best, we might see some temporary relief from the crisis, but the political instability and crisis is going to continue. And I think we might get some clarity only after the appointment of the next army chief, which is due in November. So fingers crossed till November.
Ayesha Siddiqa, you agree?
Well, yes, but in the long term, I don't see, I'm very skeptical of stability coming to the country. I don't think, it's not just about change at the top of the army. Of course, that will bring some marginal stability, but that does not necessarily mean that the behavior of the army is going to change. The army will continue to play its power games, supporting one party versus the other. I think that needs to change. The military needs to concentrate on its main role of defending, securing the country against external threat, but also assisting, political governments whenever there are the natural disasters or something. This time, what one has noticed that unlike 2010 and 2011, this time, the army was less present. Army helicopters came in very late in rescuing people than what was there in the past. So instability
Why is that?
Will remain.
Why is that, you think?
This time, I think it's resources that could be an excuse. It's because, I don't know. They were hoping that the political government is going to request. I think in several cases, political government did request, but mainly it's because there is generally dearth of resources. The military and the government was waiting for release of funds from the IMF. So, probably that's one of the reasons. I mean, there is something which is amiss this time. 2010-11, I'm also reminded in 2010-11, when the military would support religious groups in providing relief work. This time, people have been more on their own. And of course, religious groups have also been there. But military keeping, remaining at the back, which is very interesting.
So, Rafiul Kakar, is that your feeling where you are in Quetta as well? That it seems as though no one's running a tight ship this time around.
Sorry, can you please repeat?
Do you get the same sense as Ayesha Siddiqa that there isn't quite the resolve and the drive coming from the higher instances of office, be they civilian or military?
Not necessarily. I think this time around, the scale of the disaster it's almost unprecedented, and it's significantly larger than we have had in 2010 and 11. I think the political instability and crisis has affected the commitment and resolve of the government negatively. But I think it's just the typical reactive nature of government response to such disasters. So I don't see a particular sort of difference in terms of approach from 2010. I think we were reactive in 2010, and unfortunately, we are still reactive in 2022. I don't see any major difference in that sense.
All right, so jury's still out over whether or not there can be a coming together among rival domestic political leaders. Could the crisis also lead to fence mending with India? India also hit, by the way, with flooding, not as bad, of course. Their prime minister tweeting his support, Narendra Modi, saying, saddened to see the devastation caused by the floods in Pakistan. We extend our heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims, the injured, and all those affected by this natural calamity, and hope for an early restoration of normalcy. Now, Modi's Pakistani counterpart had ruled out food imports as part of so far, it's been 3 years and counting since there's been a halt in cross-border trade amid tensions. But now, the finance minister, Miftah Ismail, says the government will consider land border imports based on supply needs. Ayesha Siddiqa, do you see a thaw in Pakistan-India relations to deal with the enormity of this crisis?
Well, there is a desire at the Ministry of Finance. I mean, Miftah Ismail said that we will, but then the Prime Minister said that their irritants would need to be sorted out. I think we are stuck where we were stuck, on political issues dominating this immediate crisis. And I think there is one way of getting out of this problem of, how do you provide relief for Pakistan is aid, but the other is trade. I think trade is essential, and this is where Pakistan should open up. In fact, the agreement that was negotiated between Pakistan and India between 2013 and 2018, between the governments with the industries also sitting there, heads of industries also sitting, including agriculture, was one of the things which was decided was that there would be scheduling of any imports of food items, fruit and vegetables, that whenever there would be a natural disaster or a shortage of this kind that we are facing today, and there will be a extraordinary price hike as Pakistan is seeing today, there will be will be opened. I think that needs to be worked out. A step should be taken. Pakistan, in some ways, the government of Pakistan expects that that India recently, Indian government, a member of the Indian government said that Pakistan is continuing to aid and abet terrorists. That that is raising caution, and that is considered as lack of change of attitude in India. But I think in this case, Pakistan and India both need to kind of, because this is a problem. This is a calamity. This is a devastation, which is not just a Pakistan problem. South Asia is in the belt of that, of a region affected by climate change. So the region needs to come together, and trade is definitely one way of doing it.
Yeah, and there's some in the opposition who have been stating that this call by, or this putting out the feelers, if you will, by the finance minister is a stab in the back for citizens of those disputed territories in Kashmir. What's your prediction, Ayesha Siddiqa? Will those borders reopen a little bit?
See, they were gently opening up. I mean, there was some communication. There was people, Kashmir, for example, people were kind of moving back and forth. Some positive things were also happening. For example, very recently, a young 16-year-old Pakistani Kashmiri boy who had accidentally kind of chasing his two pigeons had gone on the other side, and he was taken into custody. The process has started to return him. So, there was that happening. But the problem is that in Pakistan, for instance, with this background music of political parties fighting each other and Imran Khan versus the PDM, that is somehow a major problem. It will the trade, I'm afraid, is going to get so politicized that the Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif will be unable to take a decisive step forward.
Rafiullah Kakar, does your crystal ball say the same?
Sorry, there was some disruption in your voice. Pardon, can you please repeat?
I was saying, does your crystal ball say the same, that domestic politics will make it politically impossible for the Pakistanis to accept food aid from neighboring India?
I think the announcement by the finance minister is a welcome development, but given the politics these days, the finance minister himself doesn't have many supporters within the ruling party and ruling coalition. So yes, I think at least until the next general elections, I don't see a sort of fundamental shift in Pakistan-India relations. I think minor changes might occur, but the deadlock on major issues will remain the same. I think the theoretical possibility for some major shift and reopening of trade relations might emerge after the next general elections.
Jennifer Akram Khan, let's talk logistics here, because this aid, and particularly food aid, as we're seeing prices soar throughout the country as a result of the monsoon flooding. How do you get it into Pakistan? How much of it needs to come over land?
Sure. I think one of the biggest issues is not even getting it into Pakistan; it's getting it around Pakistan. Our colleague Rafiullah here, he's in Quetta right now. I was just there a few days ago. There was no mobile phone connection. There was no landline. There was only one road open at the time, and the only way in and out was by air. So access is a major issue, and the same is there for Sindh, where a lot of it is underwater. So the support for people is going by the roads. I do think in the coming weeks we'll see this water recede. Having said that, between then and now and then, there is predicted to be more rains. And that obviously is something that we're all concerned about, because the rivers are still flowing through the country. In terms of support coming from overseas, I think when we speak to households, They're saying that they're depleted of food resources. I was hearing stories in Quetta of people coming on donkey carts from faraway villages, and that had been their only way to get to Quetta, and they were saying that they had no food left. So I think that this is a serious issue at the household level. Whether the markets will have the food, the people will not be able to afford it, because what we're seeing is around 75% of people are saying that their livelihoods have been completely destroyed. And these are families where they've been living in debt for generations. So they don't necessarily have the money available, even if the items become available on the local markets.
And when you rebuild, how do you rebuild to different norms when you don't have any money, as you just described it so aptly?
What we're seeing is that people are rebuilding their shelters by themselves. A lot of them live in mud shelters. They know the risks of doing that, but they have no choice. They might be using stone depending on what's available, but even if they use stone, then they use mud between that stone. I think this is where they need support to be able to rebuild in a better way, so that we know that there's going to be another natural disaster. We know every year there's monsoon. We know that this climate change is resulting in many, many disasters happening on top of each other. These people don't have enough money anymore. Even if they did before, COVID had a huge impact on incomes. And now, as I said, the food prices and even the fuel prices, right now in Quetta, as I was saying, no fuel for cooking either. It's a serious issue going on at the moment, and I think we do need to give external support. While I hope that people can be resilient by themselves, I think at this time there is urgent need for support to these people who are really living on the poverty line.
So, Rafiul Kakar, where you are in Baluchistan, there, when you have this new normal that we're describing, I guess the obvious piece of advice is don't live in a mud hut, but some don't have an alternative. So, what do you do? What's the way forward for that segment of the population that's the poorest?
Well, I think in the short term, I think there are a few important things that we need to prioritize. Jennifer alluded to some of them. First, we need to restore physical connectivity. Major part of the province still remains physically disconnected. Secondly, we need to prioritize the restoration of power, cellular network, gas. The gas supply is disrupted. The power supply is disrupted. Cellular network still doesn't work in most parts of the province. These are the most important things to allow the provision of relief efforts, to ensure the success of relief efforts. So this is something that we need to do and prioritize in the short term. And then in the medium and long term, when we go to the rehabilitation and reconstruction phase, I think this also offers an opportunity for the communities, for the government and international community to support, encourage and promote climate sensitive and climate resilient infrastructure. Right now in Balochistan, 95% houses in rural areas are made of mud. So these mud houses are highly vulnerable to rains and monsoons. So I think this is an area where we also have an opportunity to rebuild, but rebuild in a better way, in a climate resilient and climate sensitive way. And this is where the expertise
what materials do you use to make them more climate resilient?
I think this is an area where we need the support of international experts, international community, where clearly Pakistan is not sort of a leader in building climate resilient infrastructure. This is an area where we need support from international community, where we need the knowledge that has been practiced and the practices related to climate resilient infrastructure. I think at the moment we are, frankly speaking, we are blank on this front as a government, as a community.
Ayesha Siddiqa?
Yes, please. Yeah, I think we need to draw international attention, and Pakistan definitely needs support from outside, not just for building infrastructure, not just building capacity, but also we need an understanding that if this kind of a menace is going to happen repeatedly, then, and not because of things that Pakistan doing. I mean, Pakistan has very little input into, the climate change disaster. There has to be developing countries need to take that responsibility of at least definitely helping Pakistan kind of shoulder this burden, but also develop its capacity. But along with it, I think what international governments, international agencies, aid agencies need to do is help, develop greater accountability of how this aid is spent. I mean, I, as a Pakistani, as a concerned citizen, I'm worried about that, once the water levels go down and, things return to a bit more normal than they are right now, we will take our eyes off accountability, which is it's very important to know and to see how this money is being spent, that it's going into development, into building, the destroyed infrastructure and helping people than anything else.
Yeah, that is something we heard a promise this Thursday from the Prime Minister that no money would be mismanaged. Jennifer Ankram Khan, for people watching around the world, there are plenty of precedents where there was huge disaster, a huge outpouring of support, places like Haiti, where the money was then completely mismanaged. So what do you do? Again, we're speaking ahead of the visit of the UN Secretary General next week.
Sure. I think, every different sector has their own way of accountability. So I think I would talk more about the aid agencies. We have ways in which people can report to us if they're facing any kind of fraud situation or abuse or any type of problems that they're facing to do with the project. Even they have questions about why they were selected or not selected. We have the ability to receive those complaints and to respond to those complaints. And every organization is required to do that, and we do manage those complaints. Sometimes, especially when you have cash programs, you end up with a large number of complaints, but it's very important to investigate each and every one. When it comes to the UN, I believe they also followed this kind of a program. Of course, the important thing is to keep the administrative costs as little as possible. And that's often why we also partner with local community organizations who are already established in the area, and we support them to deliver the aid. And we think that that's some of the most efficient aid that we can provide in the longer term, because also those people are from that community and they'll remain there in the longer term.
We're going to have to leave it there. Jennifer Ankram Khan, I want to thank you for joining us from Islamabad. I want to thank Ayesha Siddiqa in the UK, Rafiullah Kakar in Quetta. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Our thoughts are with those who are struggling as those floodwaters make their way south from the north of Pakistan. More coverage of it on our website, France24.com.